Hello, and welcome to A Reader's Paradise. Say, if you like the literature that's being performed for you and you like the interviews that you hear, please give us a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, stick around at the end of this interview for a special preview to my new audio drama called Lenny Gray. You will want to stick around so that you can hear that episode. Now that the housekeeping stuff is out of the way, I want to introduce you to Melanie Rodriguez. And here's a little bit about Melanie. Melanie Rodriguez holds a BA in creative writing from Green Mountain College in Pulteney, Vermont. She says she's been compelled to write stories dictated by the voices she's heard inside her head since she was a child, citing the storyline of her debut book, Child of Blackwen, an Artemis Ravenwing novel, as one of the main reasons she majored in creative writing. It's an epic work of high fantasy narrating the coming-of-age story of a young adult vampire, half-human creature known as dhampir. I know I'm butchering that name.
Dhampir.
Dhampir, okay. A former New Yorker, Rodriguez is an avid reader and sports fan who now lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with her overly excited Shepsky Shepherd Husky mix, Shadow. So please welcome her to the show and tell us a little bit more about you, Miss Rodriguez.
So my name is Melanie, and first things first, I have always wanted to be a novelist for as long as I could remember. I've actually had this storyline since I was 11, and I kind of took it a little bit more seriously when I was 13, and I'm actually almost 30 now. I'm still working on this series. So it really is my life's work.
Oh, I'm going to tell my age here. You said you're almost 30. That means I'm old enough to be your dad. I mean, it's funny when you said when I was 13, I'm like, wow. For me, that was way back in the 20th century. But go on.
It's really funny too, because every time I actually work in retail as well. This is actually what helps with my self-publishing process, and also kind of just meet a lot of people, also kind of network at times too. And the first thing they tell me is, are you in school for writing then? Are you just writing these drafts? So I'm like, no, actually school was a very long time ago. I'm actually published, and I'm trying to make this my only job.
Oh, I know that feeling. Hey, and here's an interesting fact. You went and you studied creative writing in the state of Vermont. I actually have my master's in creative writing from Vermont. I went to Goddard College up there in Plainfield, Vermont.
Oh, yay. Very exciting.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you know where that is, but it's, I know there's Vermont.
No, I've definitely heard of it.
Yeah. So I know what it's like to go up there. I know when I was up there writing, doing my master's program, I enjoyed the solitude up there. I enjoyed being up there in the mountains, and I enjoyed being in a community of writers and having all of us just, do this group thing where we were just working on our craft, at the same time. And, to be able to go up there and get great feedback on the work that we were doing was just invaluable. I don't know if you had that same experience where you went.
Oh, I definitely did. We were a very small campus as well, and we were a sustainable liberal arts college, so we focused a lot with the environment as well, and a lot of my writing courses also kind of had a lot of tie-ins with nature. And one of my favorite classes actually was a creative fictions workshop, and it was a once-a-week class in my junior semester. But it was nice because it was a 3-hour course, and when it was really nice outside, we got to do our workshops outside. And it was really nice to be able to do some free writing out there, especially kind of just drawing in like the creative juju that was all around. It was a very peaceful area and really, really great environment to get the work done.
Yeah, I often tell myself if I could just live on campus up there, I would be in heaven. Because I'm from the Chicagoland area, And it's a city. It's very noisy. There's a lot of hustle and bustle. It's very, very busy. And sometimes it's difficult to find that just perfect quiet space where you can like decompress and actually hear yourself think, so that that creative juju, as you call it, can come through. I'm amazed that I've published 25 books, in this environment, but, I have. But I just know that when I went up to Goddard, when I went up to that campus, I was like, oh my God, I could actually feel myself decompressing from the, noise pollution. Because,
It's so very true.
Yeah. So you've had that experience too, sounds like.
Oh yeah. New York, I grew up in New York and New Jersey, so it was always hustle and bustle there as well. And when I was getting ready to start looking at colleges, the first thing I told my family was, I want to get out of state. I want to go away. I need to figure out, where I can go and perfect my craft and at least help me get to the dream that I've always had. And my mom especially was full steam ahead. Let's go and get you out of state and see what we can find. And my aunt, actually, she had kind of gave me the idea of looking into the New England country pretty much. She had also gone to college. She actually went to college in Massachusetts, and she remembered how I always had fun visiting there and how I always felt at peace in a more quiet setting. And then we ended up finding Green Mountain in Vermont, and that once I set foot on campus there, that's when I realized, yep, this is the place that is going to make all this happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really, so for anybody out there who's a writer or a budding writer, I know, you and I can geek out on this only, for the whole show, just talking about it. But let me back up a little bit and unpack, something you said earlier for, those aspiring writers out there. You said that this was a dream to become a writer that you had since you were a child. And can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, for example, for me, we sound like we have similar stories, or we have a commonality of experience here, because when I was a very young boy, I always heard the voices in my head telling me story. And it was one of those voices that was so clear that I could not ignore it or tell it to go away. It was constantly talking, and it wasn't just regular old mind chatter. It was really this voice that was like calling and pulling, from somewhere to tell a story. And so I don't know if you had a similar experience, but tell us about that aspect of your writing journey of like, how did you know that you wanted to be a writer, and how did you give yourself permission to trust the voices that you heard?
So I also kind of would say that I had the voices as well. A lot of it also for me came through dreams. I dreamt of my main protagonist, Artemis, for a really long time, and also another main character, Shadow. And there was just one day that finally, this is actually a really funny story. I have also a terrible habit of collecting notebooks. And when I finally started to pen their story, it was actually in a gym class that we had some free time. And I remember it snowing outside, and I had this empty notebook, and I just finally decided, hey, I have the time. Let me just pen some stuff down. Maybe something will come out of it. And I just started writing and writing until I realized that my gym period had finished.
Yeah.
So I remember taking it home and showing my mom the story. And for a long time, she had said that, I had like this kind of gift, but I was a little wary about it at first. I was like, maybe not quite yet. Maybe if there's something else that I want to do in life, I'll figure it out. But because I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be an artist of pictures, though, because I always like to draw as well. And I showed her the story. I told her maybe I can probably draw from it. And when she read it, she was like, this is the first time that I can really tell you that you are onto something. And it would be a real shame if this just kind of went like your other notebooks and went into the dust pile. And then I just kept hearing the characters telling me, hey, keep writing. And I did, and I haven't looked back since.
Melanie, that is a similar thing that happened with me when I wrote my first book. I was at work, and I took a legal pad and I went down to the office cafeteria, and I just felt so compelled to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat in my whole lunch hour, and I just started writing out my first book, handwritten on legal pads. Every day at noon, I would go down to the cafeteria, and I would write. And the next thing I knew, I had all these legal pads. It looked like a manifesto. People were like, "Are you working on a brief or something?" And I said, "Yeah, this is an incredibly important work here. Incredibly important work." But yeah, once, at least for me, once that, once I sit down and I listen to that, to what I need to give birth to, because with all my books, I like to say I've been pregnant 25 times, so I have 25 children. So I've been pregnant an awful lot. But when that's what I call it. When I'm pregnant with a book, when it's time to give birth to it, it is time to give birth to it. I cannot stop. It has to come out, and it has to pour out of me. And there are times I know that when I'm writing, an entire day goes by. Sometimes I forget to eat. I'm just in this space, with the characters. It's just flowing through me. And it's like, I even forget that it's me because I feel like it's something else that has taken over me. I don't know if you get that too.
It's very true. I get that so much. And I am internally grateful for both my mother and my boyfriend, because especially the forgetting to eat part, that has happened to me so much. There will be times that literally I feel like it's like an hour possibly that I could have written when it's 5 hours. And all of a sudden I'll get a knock on the door and they're like, "Hey, don't you want to eat? Don't you at least want tea or coffee or something?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's right. I should do this. Otherwise, how else are the stories are going to get out?"
Yeah. I mean, sometimes
they need to have a.
No, because sometimes even when I'm in the space, sometimes I have a dog and a cat. Sometimes the cat's in the room with me, and I'll get up and I'll start walking around and gesticulating like I'm the character, and the cat looks at me like, like my dog Coco just gets completely confused, and she starts she starts whimpering and it's like, "Oh no, what's wrong with him? He's just talking to himself." But yeah, that is so true. When as writers we do forget to eat. Sometimes I've forgotten to shave because I'll come in on a Friday night and and for 2 days straight, I'm back there, doing my thing with writing. So tell us about your latest book that you want to talk about. I believe that you have a series. So tell us about your writing and how and why this genre. What drew you to this particular genre?
So for fantasy, it's something that I've always loved growing up. I always loved reading about vampires and elves. Like Lord of the Rings was one of my favorite things. I actually got into vampires thanks to the anime Vampire Hunter D. Actually, it's a really, really old anime, but I still very much love it. They also have a series of novels too that even goes on to this day, which is really exciting for me because then they also have artwork in there, which makes the artist in me really happy. I also got inspired about the dhampirs by a husband-wife author combo, Barb and J.C. Hendy. They introduced dhampirs to me that way as well through their Noble Dead saga. And I've pretty much been enamored with it. And the first thing I kind of noticed growing up too was there weren't really a lot of like dhampir vampire novels also really geared for young adults. I had to I kind of just switched from teen books to adult books really quickly. And this was way before Twilight and everything else as well. And thinking to myself while I was writing, I was like, I wholly believe in the phrase that if you can't find the book you're looking for, then you have to be the one to make it. And it was kind of like another motivator as well for me to not only give these guys, all these crazy nuts in my head, their airtime, but also there are definitely other people that probably have felt the same way. and why not give them something fun to read as well?
Now, let me ask you a question. Do you have to do any type of research to write in this genre? So that is there a formula that you have to follow or anything like that? Because when you're writing fantasy, it is different. I don't know if they play by if the structure of fantasy goes by the same rules as, like, say, literary fiction or something like that. Or, do you have just free reign to just create as you see fit?
With fantasy, I always felt that I had a lot more freedom, which is another reason I really enjoyed writing in that genre. Because I have done, in college especially, I've done literary essays, I've done, nonfiction as well, but I always felt restricted by that. And in fantasy, some people will say that, vampires can't walk in the daylight or whatnot, and I kind of bend those rules a little bit with a little bit of freedom, like kind of creative freedom with that. I also, the research that I do is cultural mythologies. I am very drawn to a lot of mythologies like Celtic mythologies, Greek mythologies, and I kind of intertwine some of my ideas with a lot of their stories. So I do have like a pantheon of goddesses in my story for the Artemis Ravenwing novels, and they are very involved with the lives of my characters. So that's kind of like pulling from Greek mythology a little bit. So in a way, like trying to kind of pay homage to a lot of my favorite mythologies, I do a lot more research to kind of show my appreciation for it as well.
Oh, okay. That's really fascinating. My first real introduction to a vampire series was through a friend of mine who passed away, unfortunately. Her name was Leslie Esdale, and she started off as a romance writer for Harlequin. So she wrote under the name L.A. Banks for a number of years. But then she spun off to a vampire huntress series. And so, I had done book tours with her, and we've been on panels together. And it was such a switch from romance, because romance was so structured and so formulaic. And, she said something similar too, that it freed her from writing the romance in the way that, the publisher, within the publishing guidelines that she had to follow. And so when she wrote the Vampire Huntress series, I think there are about 9 or 10 books in that series that she was able to produce. She was able to do.
I actually remember reading one of her books.
Really? Oh my God! Yeah, Leslie was my buddy. I mean, we have gone on several tours together. And so, we talked about that all the time, because I told her, I said, I know you based your male character on me, Leslie. You can just tell me that. I think his name was Carlos. If I remember correctly. I said, I know.
Yes, it was, actually.
Yes, I said, I know Carlos is me, Leslie. You don't have to pay me anything, but let me tell you what Carlos needs to do. And so, it was, and before she passed away, she actually got to introduce then President Obama at a big rally in Philadelphia. So that was one of the highlights of her life. Oh
my goodness.
Yeah. So I knew her very, very well. But so that was my first.
It's a small world.
Yeah. What's that thing? 6 degrees of separation or something like that. It's really, really a small.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I remember that, because I grew up, I was more literary fiction, and, my reading habits I'm talking about. It was more literary fiction, mainstream fiction, and with a little mystery mixed in. But I had never ventured over into fantasy until I met her. And so she made it so accessible for me to want to read, because her characters were doing some badass shit, I'm like, shadows walking up walls, and, I'm like, wait, what? It was, and the way she wrote it was just, fabulous. So let me ask you this. In your novels, how badass are your characters?
Oh my gosh. If I had to rank for a couple of them, because some of them are more experienced soldiers than others. Like when I first started sharing my novels with everyone, and I would ask everybody, who's your favorite character and whatnot, I was actually pretty surprised with the turnaround of answers. I have a lot of people really appreciating my elven warrior Shadow. And they were saying, "My goodness, like he's a crazy, MF," and I'm just going to say it like that.
Okay, that's fine.
And I just started laughing, thinking, "Oh, thank you, thank you guys." So I would say if out of a 10, I would give him a 10 out of 10. I also have a witch supporting character, and everyone loves her sarcasm. And in book 2, I actually expand on her battle prowess, and everyone's just like, seriously, where are all these people coming from? And I'm like, again, they're just in my head, and eventually they get all of their, badassery in time. And even my main protagonist, Artemis, works on her badassery. Because the one thing I appreciate about my characters is I show a lot of their struggles, because I don't believe in a perfect warrior. I believe in someone who kind of defines their badassery by everything that they've done and how they improve and how much they live to protect one another. And then looking good while they're doing it.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you like your characters to be flawed to a degree. They have to have flaws. They cannot be perfect.
Right. Like if they were perfect, I don't imagine anyone really relating to them. And I want my characters to be loved and relatable.
To be loved and relatable. And that is awesome. So let me ask you this question. I know you say that the stories, just come to you, or however you receive them. About how long does it take for you to produce a book? Because I think you're like 4 or 5 books in now, if I'm correct.
Yes. And each one has taken a unique amount of time. So when I first wrote Child of Blackwen, which is the first novel of the Artemis Ravenwing novels, the very first version I did at 13. And then when I finally got it published, I really want to admit that was about my 14th draft.
Oh, I'm so glad you...
And I published at 24.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because for people who are not writers, I think sometimes they think a writer just goes into their little writing space or their little cave, stay in there a few hours or a day or so and come out with a perfect masterpiece and say, I have written the perfect book. And that's just not true. It's a process. And the fact...
If only it were.
Yeah, if only it were. It is draft after draft after draft to try to get, to try to develop the story, to try to give the story the full body that it needs. And also not only to do that, but also to make the writing crisp, because you can write something and it can be completely flat, and, but when I don't know about you, but once I go through a draft, I have several stages where I have to go back through and find the right tags, to add after I said, he said, she said. I have to find the right word marriages to give the sentence a little bit more boost, so that there's a cadence and there's a sweetness to the sounds of the words. And I don't know if you do that, but I know for me, when I write, I want there to be a sweetness to the sound of the words. I want the reader to be like, ooh, that sentence sort of was like different. It's just out of my normal sort of self-talk, but it makes so much sense. And I love doing that. And I appreciate the fact that
it's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very true. Especially like I edit in multiple sorts of ways. So I'll, especially once I get stuck, because writer's block happens, and sometimes it takes longer than other writer blocks that come up. But the way I do it is I'll take a break. Usually I'll go away from the draft for about a week. Then I'll go back and I'll look at it with fresh eyes. But I also have a few people that also are my extra pair of eyes, and they give me their notes as well. But when I go back to the draft, I do kind of like a line edit at first. So actually going with your sweetness, because I like the quote there. So I'm going to use it too. But it's very true. And you kind of just want to make sure that it doesn't sound like, hey, he said this, or, well, how did he say that? Did he say it with exuberance? Did he say it, in a really terrible, dark kind of way? How do I make it better? And then I'll do another edit that's going to be for the flow and just making sure that, it really is going in a direction I want. And this is where I say this is crazy Mel edit, because I have a terrible obsession with Sharpies. And I'll usually use different colored Sharpies for different edits as well.
Yeah.
But it always works. And it helps.
Yes. And I can certainly attest to doing that, because I call it bloodying up the page. I need the page to be bloody because that way I know that it has been, really looked at, and, that I have the right word with the right meaning and those sorts of things. Let me ask you this. In this genre, is there an author that you follow that sort of inspires you or gives you that sort of like, wow, I need, I don't want to necessarily be like them, but I like their style or the way they handle things? Is there one or two authors that, really you just love to follow, you love their work, you love the way they present, those sorts of things?
I actually have several, but one that was always very inspiring to me, unfortunately she too was no longer in the world, and to give us more of her beautiful stories. Sarah Douglas, actually. She was an Australian epic fantasy author. And I say epic compared to other types of fantasies because she actually did write these, super large novels like George R.R. Martin, like size novels. And they were just such great weaving of all these stories that she did. She actually even did a trilogy that combined all of the previous stories she did into a single world. And even that, like, so many people could try that, and not everyone could pull it off as well as she did. And it was always really inspiring for me, especially, to say, hey, you think that's impossible, throw it out the window and you're going to do it.
Okay. All right, cool. The next question I have for you is, your books, have any of them been turned into audiobooks yet? Have you thought about doing an audiobook on your work?
I have been thinking about it. I've been asked by a few friends, especially, who prefer listening to books rather than reading them. So it is something I've been thinking about.
Okay. All right, cool. The next thing I have for you, now this is going to be the ultimate, creative's question of, that I think all writers want. So here's the situation. You have a big Hollywood production company who has gotten your work and they want to make it into a movie. You have this very, very large budget. You have everything you need except the cast for your main characters. And they are asking you as the writer, who do you see as the main character in your book? So I'm going to ask you that question. If you had the big budget Hollywood folks come to you, say, we love your book, we want to make it into this epic movie, who would your main characters be played by? What actor or actress?
I've actually been asked that quite a bit, and I think I've surprised people with my answers because, admittedly, I would actually prefer it to be an animation movie versus an actual live action.
Okay. And so if it was an animation, well, you still have to have a voice actor in there. Is there a voice?
Oh, yes.
is there a voice of your characters that, stands out? I know you can't have someone be Morgan Freeman who sounds like God, But maybe it is.
I mean, it would be amazing.
Yeah, it would be amazing if Morgan Freeman narrated as and so who do you what voices, what actor's voice would you consider?
So for Artemis, and it's like another mini funny story. I actually met this voice actress very recently at Denver Pop Culture Con. But I didn't tell her because I didn't. You only have a certain amount of time that you get to speak to them, and I had admired her for so long as well. Actually, since I was 13. But Laura Bailey, I would love for her to voice my character.
Oh, okay. And just for those who don't know who she is, can you give us a sense of, the other work that Laura Bailey has done that folks may know?
Yes. She is very known in a lot of animes and video games. So for the old school people like me, she was Keiko in Yu Hakusho, and she was also Lust in Full Metal Alchemist. And for video games, she was also she's actually featured in the new Gears of War 5 game. She is actually Kate Dietz. I think the last name is Dietz, but the first name is Kate, and she was actually in Gears of War 4 as well. But Gears of War 5 focuses on her character more.
Ah, speaking of, you just said something interesting that I thought may be another interesting route for your work. What if your work were turned into a video game? Would that be cool?
That would be so great, and it would actually be perfect because there's plenty of side quests to do.
Okay, so now it wouldn't be film for you. It would be cartoon, and it would be a game, or maybe even a virtual reality game that you just step into and play.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that sounds fun.
Pretty much.
Pretty much. Well, I think this is a great time to step back and let us hear a little bit, because I believe you're gonna read the Child of Blackwen is what we're reading tonight.
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to
Yes, it is.
We're going to step back and we're going to let you read an excerpt from your book, The Child of Blackwen. All right. So I'm going to count you down from backwards from 5, and then we'll go. You ready?
I am ready.
Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I awoke in a pile of clothing I had loosed from my trunks in an effort to pack. I smelled the foxblood before seeing myself covered in it. My back ached as it never had before. I must have flown for some time. My control had slipped more than I thought. How was I going to face Arlena if I couldn't even contain the dark side of my heritage? I grabbed all the blood-stained clothes I slept on and rushed to toss them into the fireplace in the main room. I slipped out of the ones I wore once I was in the washroom, and I ignored the inflamed reds of my skin as I scrubbed the foxblood from my body. My vision blurred more the longer the process took. The monster was winning. It was a good thing I was leaving Ellewynth. Perhaps that was the true reason I wanted to escape in the first place. Wouldn't it be simpler to let Arlena rid Arrygn of another monster? No, a part of me answered. You must fight. You must live. I crawled out of the washtub and curled into a ball. I didn't want to die, but neither did I want to live in fear. Images of the dream where Mother and Arlena fought flashed into my mind. I sat up and clenched my hands into fists. This fight isn't just about you, I thought. It's about Mother, too. I had to fight Arlena, for Mother's sake. Perhaps the sudden moment of courage would stay with me for the rest of my days. I forced myself off the ground and threw on a clean tunic and breeches. The material clung to my still wet and reddened skin, and I did not bother to brush my hair. It waved whether it was soaked or not, so it did not matter. I stared at the last set of blood-stained clothes and gingerly picked them up. Once I reached the fireplace, I hesitated to throw away the bundle in my hands. I couldn't tear my gaze from the scarlet blotches in the fabric. You are a monster, I whispered. You always will be. The knock that echoed into the room startled me. I dropped the bundle on my bare feet. Who was here at this hour? Avalanche hell, did I leave a visible trail of fox corpses behind? Against my better judgment, I opened the door, and I stood face to face with Shadow. He looked exhausted, with his hair loose and glazed green eyes. He became more alert when he saw my inflamed skin color and tear-stained face. Shadow reached out to touch me, but I pulled back. It was then that he noticed the bloodied clothes I dropped beside the fireplace. Ellewynth's hell, Shadow whispered. His focus returned to me. Another blackout. I nodded. I'm losing myself. We can work through this, he said, as he stepped forward once more. I took another step away from him. There's no working through this. Artemis, stop it, I cried. Shadow, I am a vampira. I kill animals with no memory of it. Sooner or later it could be you, or Jack, or Talisa. Why do you keep my company knowing that one day I could kill you? Shadow shut the door behind him. He took off his cloak, and he went to pick up the bundle of clothes. He shut his eyes a moment after he tossed them into the fire. When he eventually opened them, Shadow walked toward me. He grabbed my arm before I could back away. Look at me, Shadow said, his tone gentle. When I didn't, he lightly grasped my chin and forced me to gaze at him. You are a dhampir. You are a child of both the light and the dark. You kill foxes, and you will kill people one day. His grasp grew firm when I tried to look away. Monsters, they have no remorse. They enjoy stealing lives. They enjoy inflicting pain. You are not tainted, Artemis. There is a safer and easier way to live with this. But, Artemis, I am a soldier, Shadow interrupted. You keep my company when you're more than aware of what I am capable of. I've been killing since long before you were born. Those faces haunt me every night I close my eyes. What haunts me more are the faces of those who could have been saved. If I did not serve in the wars, those who were saved would not be here today. We do what we must, my dear. You are not lost, do you hear me? None of us would let that happen. He wiped a tear of mine away. No one is without a trouble. I do not keep your company merely because you're Tamina's daughter. I do so because I enjoy it. I do not linger around hearts filled with darkness. I keep to those filled with light.
Wow, what a great reading. Are you sure you don't want to narrate your books? I mean, you have the voice, you have the cadence, you have the rhythm for it. What a great excerpt. Thank you for sharing that. I was sitting here taking notes. I mean, just because I fell into the story so quickly and so easily. I mean, it was just a smooth transition into the work, especially with starting off with this notion of, foxblood, of having killed something to satisfy the monster within. And so, that whole passage just, had a lot of internal, or, it infers that there's a lot of internal conflict going on. And, what I would say, accepting one's identity in the story, let's pull back a layer right there and talk about, why this scene, why did you pick this one? And, tell us more about, this internal conflict the way I receive that piece.
Oh, yeah. So the one thing that I focus on a lot with Artemis is she is, again, a dhampir. She's a child of the light, which I say, is the human, and then the vampire is the dark. And for her, it's always been a struggle because she never truly embraced what she really is. And in a way, she always abhorred the idea of trying to feed off of others in order to sustain her own life. She always felt that it was a very impure thing, and she hated that she had to do it. And pretty much whenever she fought it, she would start getting blackouts more and more as she grew older. And the dhampir version of her, the vampire part of her, always kind of just went for foxes because she grew up with the elves. She basically lives in the forest, and there was an abundance of foxes there. And every time she would black out, it just she just hated herself even more because she took life, especially just to sustain her own. And she just felt like she was a monster. And she felt that the more she would try and push it down and hide that nature, the more she could try and conquer it. But she's just losing more and more control as time goes on.
Yeah, it sounds like, just to kind of paraphrase with that, trying to deny yourself who you truly are is like trying to take all of your emotions and put them in a trash can and hold them in a trash can. It's going to come out. It's like trying to hold a gorilla in a trash can.
Exactly.
It's going to come out. And it also speaks to, what, people just go through in general throughout their life of becoming something that they don't want to become. I think that just happens in life. You can just go through life and you can believe you're one way. And then suddenly one day you look up and you've become the very type of person that you abhorred, that you loathe, and you wonder how you got there.
Mm-hmm.
And, and it's all these little tiny decisions that people make, throughout their lives and throughout the day that, these little teensy weensy tiny decisions that over time, push you in a certain direction. And then this character keeps making these little decisions to try to control the uncontrollable, which is very, very interesting and sets up great conflict where the reader or the receiver of the work is looking in on this and saying, I wonder how I would feel if I had that internal, some sort of internal struggle. But then if we were to truly look at ourselves, we can see that we all have our struggles. You may have a struggle with smoking, or you may have a trouble, with something else, with food or whatever. And we all have our struggles with that. I mean, I think about even me, because chocolate and sweets, candy, I hate it. because there should be a law against anything gummy, because I cannot go into the store and see anything gummy because I will stand there and I will stand in the aisle and I will fight with myself. I will literally fight myself. Something will say, go have the gummy worms. You can't have the gummy worms. You're diabetic. Shut up. Look at that. They got the sweet and sour Patch Kids. Those look so good. Look, and they're on sale. 2 for $3. You can get and I was like, no, we're not going to do that. And then the next thing you know, I'm sitting in the parking lot eating the damn gummy worms. So why am I eating these things? I'm going to be sick. But, that's just relating, the fantasy world of what you just presented there with this internal conflict with how, we all may have, conflicts, whether we're aware of them or not, but they exist. And I think that's the wonderful thing about literature, is it gives us a chance to step back and look through the eyes of a character, although fictional, and see ourselves in those characters. Would you agree?
I definitely agree.
Yeah, I mean, it is so much fun. It is so much fun to see that. So, well, we are coming up on about 45 minutes. Man, that went by so quick.
It did.
I mean, yeah, it just went by so quick. So, let the readers know, where can we find you? Where can they download your book? How can they reach out to you? Give us your social media information so folks can find you.
All right. So the main branch I will give is that you can find me on Amazon.com. So all you have to type in is Melanie Rodriguez, and you will see the very blonde-looking girl pop up with Child of Blackwen as the first book. I also have the second book of the series out as well, Mistress of Blackwen, and I'm currently working on the third one, so you guys keep your fingers crossed for me that hopefully it'll be done this year, but it's coming. And so you can find me on Amazon. You can also find me on Facebook, and my page is Melanie A. Rodriguez. And I do have an Instagram as well, and it actually is a combination of my author and cosplay adventures. I'm a costumer as well. So that one is Kitsune_Ravenwing. And finally, I'm also on Twitter at Ravenwing Writer, and you can definitely find a lot of pretty much my promotions, as well as me promoting other authors on there as well.
Wonderful. Hey, quick question for you. And this is just another thought that came to me, something that L.A. Banks or Leslie was doing. She would have merchandise for her Vampire Huntress series. Do you have merchandise that people can get for your work?
So right now I do have, I actually have totes right now. I have a pretty large grocery tote that people can purchase from me, and it's actually on my Square Market. So to find my Square Market, you can actually find the links on my Facebook. And it's also, you can just type in Melanie Rodriguez author Square Market in your Google browsers, and you'll be able to find me there. And there are actually pictures of my first two books on there. And on the back of the tote, it says join the adventure, because why shouldn't you join an adventure and enjoy a new book to read?
Absolutely. That is so true. That is so true. Well, thank you so much for being with us here on A Reader's Paradise. And I know that the listeners have enjoyed you just as much as I have.
Well, this has been a great and fantastic moment. So thank you so much for having me on here.
All right. And so, folks, thank you again for listening to us here at A Reader's Paradise. Stick around for after this show so that you can hear an excerpt from episode 1 of Lenny Gray. That's LENNIEGRAY. Until next time, happy reading. Hi, this is Earl Sewell, host of the podcast A Reader's Paradise. I'm here to let you know about a new audio drama that I have created called Lenny Gray. It is a bi-weekly show that you can find out on Apple Podcasts, on Spreaker.com, on Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. So, what I'm doing here right now is giving you a preview of the show. Season 1 is up and running, and I hope that you will go over, check it out, leave a rating and a review. Until then, I hope you enjoy this preview of the audio drama Lenny Gray. Katie Books Productions presents Lenny Gray, an audio drama, written, produced, and narrated by Earl Sewell. Previously on Lenny Gray.
I got to have you, Lenny. I ain't gonna let no other man get a hold of you. I aim to be the only man in your life for the rest of your days. I mean that. So either you marry me tonight or you don't marry in your lifetime. I'll make sure of it.
There was an ultimatum in Curly's voice and an uncompromising fire in his eyes. He would beat her into her grave if she didn't do what he wanted. And Ida, his mean-spirited mother, would stand by and allow him to do it. Both of them had caverns of blackness so deep in their souls that even the light of God couldn't reach the bottom of them. He'd hit her before for trying to break up with her. He punched her so hard that she had a headache for 2 days. She couldn't go to the sheriff. He was another member of the white side of Curly's family. Besides, Sheriff Quinney cared as much about a colored man beating his woman as he did about shooting, hanging, or placing a colored person in jail. It just didn't matter to him, one way or the other. Lenny Gray wanted to move, but felt as if something had forced her body to become paralyzed. Curly took a slightly gentler approach. He pulled her close to him, attempting to ease her fear. He pressed her cheek against his chest and combed his fingers through her hair. Lenny Gray felt tears stinging the back of her eyes when she inhaled the strong scent of moonshine that was seeping through his skin.
You belong to me. I wanted you the moment you started to blossom. I said to myself, Curly, that Lenny Gray's gonna be your wife. You got them pretty gray eyes, long black hair. You the prize of Sweetwater. Well, my prize anyway. That's why I kept coming around your daddy. I wasn't coming around so much for him as I was doing it to try to get close to you. I wanted you to like me. Don't you remember how I was always bringing you stuff you needed? If you needed new shoes that your daddy couldn't afford to get right away, I helped him out. In fact, I'm the one who got you them shoes you got on your goddamn feet now. Most folks around this town ain't never gonna know what it feel like to have shoes on their feet. As the preacher still in the wagon, boy.
Lenny Gray looked into Ida's face, which had an impatient expression.
Yeah, he's still there,
Curly answered.
I'm gonna go get him so y'all can be married and we can get back before the rain starts,
said Ida as she stepped off the train tracks and walked towards the road. Curly stepped back and placed Lenny Gray's face between the palms of his calloused hands. He looked so deeply into her eyes that she felt her soul wince.
I know you love me. You may not say it or know how to show your feelings for me, but I know and understand that you do. I'm the best man you could ever hope for, and the sooner you let that settle into your head, the better. Don't make no sense for you try to run away from a good man like me. Shh. Don't talk. Just let me hold your shivering body close. You carry my family inside of you. There ain't no way in the world I'm gonna allow a pretty girl like you to run away from me to be mistreated by some fool. I'm gonna take care of you. You won't have to worry about nothing except taking care of the shanty I'm gonna build and the babies we gonna put on this earth. Lenny, we gonna make a lot of pretty babies together.
Lenny Gray felt as if she had just fallen out of the trouble tree and hit every branch on the way down. She was standing on unsteady legs. She didn't want to be married, and she didn't want a life in a leaky shanty filled with babies. That much she knew. That way of life was all too common in this town. In an act of desperation, she pushed Curly away from her and began running again.
Lenny, come back here!
Marshall Turner's life is a dream come true. He has a successful law enforcement career, he's married to a woman he passionately loves, and he has a daughter who makes his heart swell with pride. Then, in the blink of an eye, tragedy strikes when Luther Parker, a drifter, kills Marshall's beloved daughter and flees into hiding. But living as a fugitive is never easy, especially since Marshall and the police had launched a massive manhunt to track him down. But Marshall has to decide whether to bring Luther to justice or have his vengeance. In Have Mercy, the national best-selling and award-winning author Earl Sewell delivers it all with his riveting tale full of intrigue and suspense. Download your copy of Have Mercy today, exclusively on Amazon.com.